I was really sort of like an independent consultant, lone wolf. And then I realized about like 5, 6 years in that, like, if I wanted to do the type of work that was going to really move the needle on certain issues that I cared about, I wasn't going to be able to do that alone. Um, and I also recognized that, like, whenever I did bring in collaborators, the work just ended up being better.
Today I'm talking with James Wu, a brand strategist and founder of Studio Tomo, whose work sits at the intersection of design, empathy, and community-based practice. James has spent over 2 decades working across digital agencies, nonprofits, and global organizations, helping institutions think more clearly about who they are, who they serve, and how they show up in the world. This conversation is about how creative work changes when it's done in relationship. We talk about branding as lived experience, the role of empathy in leadership, why collaboration makes work stronger, and what it means to build creative teams that reflect the communities they serve. At its heart, this is a conversation about the foundations of creativity, the people, the relationships, and conditions that make meaningful work possible. Off we go. Enjoy. James Wu, thank you so much for joining me on I'm Here Too.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Ara.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to cover, so we will just jump right in. I want to start by giving folks a little bit of a sense of your background. So I know that you have over 20 years of experience in strategy and branding. But for those of us who might not know what that means, I know we throw those words around a lot. Can you just boil it down for us?
Sure. I mean, I think so. We're all familiar with what branding is, right? Like, even if we can't define it, I think we all sort of have a sense of what a brand means or what it encompasses. So everything from like a logo to a product name to a tagline to some iconic ad or jingle that you remember from your childhood. It's the colors you associate with a company or product, the typeface, the that sort of witty, memorable bit of copy. So branding is like all of those things. It's the visual and the verbal and the images and the words that we associate with a company or a product or even a person. Um, and branding is that perception that we have of that company or a product or person, and like the feeling. I think most importantly, it's like the feeling that they leave us with. So um, I don't know, like take a pirate, right? Right. Pirate brand. What does that include, right? It's not just the skull and crossbones logo. It's also like the funny pointy hat and the eye patch and the peg leg and the hook and the parrot on the shoulder and the swashbuckling and like foul language and cursing, and it's like arg and ahoy. It's all those things. It's like also the feeling of dread and mystery, but also the sort of like fun, romantic sense of adventure. Like all of that is the pirate brand. It's not just like, the logo. And you can think about all of that, that brand thinking applies to things like Coke. And it's not just like the color red. It's like Christmas ads with Santa Claus and polar bears and the swirl and the beautiful script word mark. And so that's all brand. Strategy is like much simpler. It's basically about like figuring out where you're going to go or where you want to go, thinking about all the factors that will like help you determine the best path. And it's really just like, okay, now how do we want to get from point A to point B? That's strategy. So like I call myself a brand strategist. It's sort of a newish term, like it's been around for like a decade plus. And that means essentially that my job is to figure out how to like transform a brand from its current state to a desired state. And so I really try to figure out like how are they currently positioned and perceived? How does the company or organization want to be positioned and perceived? And I try to give them a blueprint to get there.
When you mentioned your two examples, it's funny, this idea of perception and then like how it meets the audience member. Because the minute you said pirates, like I was back at Disney and Pirates of the Caribbean and like yo
Oh my
ho, and like before Johnny Depp, but essentially that. And then when you said Coca Cola, I immediately went to Don Draper and Mad Men. So you can see
God. Yeah.
where I'm sitting.
Yeah, exactly. You got to teach the world how to sing. I mean, it's brand is like all those different points and like moments and experiences that we have throughout our lives. Like that's what a brand is. So we can do our best to control that with like determining the design system and the exact language we want to use in the copy. But at the end of the day, it's like so much more about the experience that someone has with it.
Well, speaking of experiences built up over a lifetime, how did you even get into brand strategy work?
Um, I don't know. Do you want me to go like way back, or do you want me to
We'll
point
take,
in my
the
career
audience.
when I became like the point in my career where I wanted to become a brand strategist, which is like somewhat, recent.
I think it's dealer's choice. We can go anywhere, and I'm here too.
Okay. So I'm gonna take us way back because that's just more fun and more interesting, I think. Um, so as a kid, I was really interested in like album covers and the feeling that they gave you. And I remember my fourth grade birthday party. It might have been two different birthday parties. I think it was the same one. I received like two like very different albums. One was Madonna's True Blue on vinyl. And I don't know if you remember, it's like very iconic. It's like her like side profile shot, like neck art, like arched back, like very sensual and like provocative. And it's just like this like black and white with this like bluish glow. And then the other was Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction, but like on cassette tape.
Okay.
And like like total opposites in terms of like music. But I was into both of them. I had very eclectic taste for a fourth grader. Um, and I remember just being so like struck by those albums, and every single album I would buy or that I'd receive as a gift from that point on, I'd like just spend like so much time just like staring at the covers, looking at the artwork inside, like along with the lyrics and liner notes. And I also had like an older brother at the time. My oldest brother, Larry, he was a teenager when I was just in elementary school, and then a college kid when I was like in middle school. And he was very cool. And he was like listening to post punk and like new wave when it swept through like Asian American communities in the United States in the 80s, like late 80s, early 90s, for whatever reason, like really got a hold of like Asian folk. Um, and he was listening to stuff like New Order and OMD and Depeche Mode and Cocteau Twins. And that album art was so different from like the stuff that I was getting from my friends, right? And really left a huge impression on me. It was like darker and moodier and like much more minimal, that artwork. And I remember seeing like Depeche Mode's Violator and like that. I don't know if you know that album. It's like black background, singular, like red rose, like on the front, like very graphic, very striking. Um, I just remember thinking it was like so cool and being so struck also by like this one album in particular, which was New Order's Substance. So it was sort of like a compilation album. It's like New Order Substance 1987. It was just like black type, like serif typeface on like a white background, and that was it. There's like no other artwork involved. And it was like unlike anything else I'd seen before in terms of like album art, just like that black type on white background. And it felt like such a statement. And sort of like the opposite of what American pop and like hard rock bands were doing at the time. And so I think like I got turned on to design at a very early age, but I never was conscious of like what it was that I was looking at. I just knew that it made me feel a certain way. When I was a teenager, I became Sorry, this was like a long journey about
No,
my,
I love this.
but like
I
when I was a teenager, I became really obsessed with magazines and like especially like magazine ads. Um, and I started tearing out ads from the magazines that I had subscriptions to, like Rolling Stone and Sports Illustrated, and like for some reason I was like subscribed to like GQ and Vanity Fair, and like I was like plastering my bedroom walls with these ads. But it's really because I had this very tacky, embarrassing wallpaper that was there when we moved into the house, and my parents like didn't want to go through the trouble of like removing this wallpaper, which had like hearts all around like the perimeter. It used to belong to um, a young girl who used to live in my room and like in the family before us, and I was just like so embarrassed by it. So I just like covered my walls with like posters of bands and movie stars um, and then also like all of these ads. I had like this whole row of Absolute Vodka ads and a bunch of like Nike ads and those old iconic like Benetton and Diesel ads and these Got Milk ads. Like I remember this one with like Cindy Crawford and drinking milk, and it was like it made me feel things as like a teenage boy, like and that was again I wasn't like I was like really intrigued by ads, but again, I never thought of it as like a potential career path. And I certainly didn't know what like branding was. That wasn't a term that ever like entered my brain or like my consciousness. Um, and I didn't even think I wanted to go into graphic design or advertising, but like these artifacts in my room and from my childhood and my teenage years like clearly made a big impression on me. I mean, if it weren't for that wallpaper, who knows what I'd be doing? I'd probably be like an accountant now. I don't know. um, so I sorry when I'll try to like wrap this to like so when I did know I wanted to become a brand strategist, like it wasn't in college. It was probably much later. It wasn't until like a decade into my career actually, because I went into college wanting to study journalism. I thought I'd write for magazines and but a few years into that I was actually like 3.5 years into like my into college when I was like looking at salaries for journalists and I was like, oh my god, I'm going to be poor until I'm 40 years old. And I freaked out, and so like 3.5 years into school I switched and my major to economics, which is sort of sad. um I mean, it was fine, like I didn't want to be pigeonholed, and I knew econ. It's not like I was like in love with it. I was good at it, and I liked my econ teachers. But it was like I could go into business, I could go into government, I could go into law, I could go into international development, and I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I wanted to find a degree that would allow me to sort of like explore different avenues. Um, but my first job right out of school was actually starting up a digital agency with classmates. I actually started it before I graduated, and we were basically like a digital advertising agency slash like product merchandiser for e-commerce. We worked with like big brands. I remember like Amazon was a client of mine, and Reebok, and I don't remember like Mattel, and um, got to work with these really big brands. So it's very exciting as like someone in my early 20s to be flying all around the country and meeting with these executives at big brands. And um, but I got burned out, and I was there for about 4 years, and I was just sort of tired of living out of a suitcase. So I decided to pivot and work in the nonprofit world. First at Brooklyn Academy of Music. I was living in Fort Greene at the time, like literally right down the street, and was like, this place seems cool. Like maybe I can translate my skills. I was basically doing like sales and business development for this agency, like account management. And it's like maybe I can translate that into fundraising and a nonprofit. I was there for a couple years, really like loved the feeling of being at a nonprofit where you're really passionate, like everyone's super passionate about the mission and the work that you're doing. Like that was really new to me and exciting. And then a couple years after that, I left and went to another nonprofit called Acumen. Acumen is a nonprofit that is tackling poverty around the world, but using the tools of business and finance and investing to do it. So they were one of the pioneers of like social entrepreneurship and one of the pioneers of impact investing. And um, that job is when I first started to become interested in graphic design and branding. So I was like reading a bunch of design blogs and books on graphic design, and I attended this conference on branding that like actually changed the trajectory of my career. It changed everything for me. And so it was a conference being put on by like the preeminent branding slash design publication of the time, still is. They're called Brand New, and it's called the Brand New Conference. And this was probably in like 2010. And I remember seeing this guy named Michael Johnson speak. Very funny, witty, charming British designer. He ran a design studio, a branding studio in London called Johnson Banks. And I was just like, I just loved the way he was thinking about branding. And it was so much less about like the actual visual work, even though the visual work that his studio produced was stunning, was so much more about like the strategic thinking behind it and like the witty verbal, like the wordplay and like how they brought these brand ideas to life through copy and like fun, like verbal expressions. And I was like, that's something I can do. Like, I can't design. Like, I'm not a designer. I wish if I could do it over again, I'd go to art school or design school and like, because I love design, um, but I couldn't do it. And I was like, well, maybe I can do this like other part of it, like this brand strategy piece. And so about a year after that conference, I was still at Acumen, and I was sort of like, guys, we need to rebrand. We need to rebrand. Our brand is terrible. And I finally convinced the powers that be that like, okay, let's do it. And I went out and hired Johnson Banks to help us rebrand. And I was living in London at the time, and I called up Michael, and he was like excited to help us out, even though we didn't have a huge budget for him. And the rest is sort of history. Like, that project completely made me fall in love with branding and brand strategy. We wrote something together along with our founder, Jacqueline Novogratz, called the Acumen Manifesto. And that was just like 100 and, I don't know, 40 words or something like that. But it has like fundamentally changed that organization and like changed their position in the world and changed how they operate and changed at the time their sort of strategic direction. And I never thought like language could do that. Like I just didn't think like my words could ever do anything like that. And so that was sort of a big moment and catalyst for me to say like, I want to do more of this. Like, I'm addicted now. And so obviously after we rebranded Acumen, I was like, well, I can't do that here again. So I took a big pivot and like went to work at this place called SY Partners, which was like a big consulting firm that works mostly with like blue chip Fortune 500 companies. And I won't go down that path, but I'm sure it'll come up again later.
I'm not going to pull out a deck of cards. I love SY Partners materials. But so, I mean, well, a lot of things are coming up for me. First, I like that you started way back because, in some level, it's sort of the air you were breathing, the things that you were influencing, and you found a way to pull that forward into what you do, you know. And I'm just curious about how did it feel being in a field where so much attention is being placed on how something looks or what it says, or like, what does that do to you as an individual within that system? Did you feel pressure to have a certain look, a certain way of being? Like, have you talked to other folks in other industries, and is it similar, different?
I mean, I think I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin. So I don't worry too much about like how I come across to other people and like how I look or how I dress or like what like my sources of inspiration are, like who I'm hanging out with. And But I know that that's like pretty endemic of like the design world. You know, agencies look a lot of agencies look a certain way for a reason, and they you walk into their studios and everyone is dressed in all black and things look beautiful and very cool and very hip. I mean, there's something certainly like attractive about that, but it's not something that I've tried to like set out to emulate. I mean, I do often like apologize to folks that, you know, our website is not where it needs to be like a prominent design studio, and we're working on it. Like, you know, let's check back in like 6 months because stuff is happening behind the scenes. And so I'm conscious that like in order to properly like attract the type of work and clients we want, we do need to show up a certain way, and there is like a certain standard. But I certainly don't think about um, like brand perception and brand image as like something that I need to embody like in my own skin, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And you sort of you've led us to the next place, which is Studio Tomo. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Studio Tomo, and then we'll jump off from there?
Sure. Studio Tomo is so I set out on my own in 2015, I should say. I was working at SYP. I got burned out pretty fast. I wasn't there that long. I was there for like under 2 years. And part of it was like, you know, it was just about work life balance. I was working like on average 60 to 80 hours a week. Sometimes, you know, 100-hour work weeks were not uncommon. Um, and also because I spent a decade in the nonprofit world, it was really difficult to like pivot and start like suddenly I'm like working on a PowerPoint deck at 3 a.m. for like the CMO of IBM on like cloud computing. And I'm just like, you know, and I had there's no like ethical dilemma that I had really with any of our clients there. But it was like a big 180 from what I was used to, and that feeling of like being really passionate about the mission of the work, and which helps, I think, because if you have a hard day and shitty things happen in your job, like it helps to remind yourself, like, well, I really believe in what we're doing and like my role in that like future state of what we're trying to build together. And so when I set out on my own, I said, one, I wanted to have like more freedom and flexibility and control over my time. My wife and I were thinking about starting a family at the time, and sure enough, we like had our first child, you know, a year later. But I think more importantly, I wanted to do work that was mission driven. I wanted to work mostly with nonprofits, and so I was a lone wolf for a few years, probably for like, you know, 5, 6 years was really like James Wu, like independent brand strategist. And occasionally I'd bring in another designer or, you know, another strategist to help me. But I was really sort of like an independent consultant, lone wolf. And then I realized about like 5, 6 years in that like if I wanted to do the type of work that was going to really move the needle on certain issues that I cared about, I wasn't going to be able to do that alone. Um, and I also recognized that like whenever I did bring in collaborators, the work just ended up being better. Surprise, surprise. And so that it took a while for me to realize that, and I think that the work that Studio Tomo does with nonprofit organizations both demands and also deserves an agency or like service providers that have not just like deep empathy for the causes and issues that they're working with, but like um, a lived experience that is relevant. And so part of the value proposition and promise of working with Studio Tomo is that we assemble custom teams for our clients based on who they are and who they're serving. And so we try to build teams that reflect their staff, reflect their communities, because we feel like oftentimes the work misses when you don't have a creative team and a strategic team that lack that experience. So it's not just about pulling in the right functional expertise or subject matter expertise. It's not enough to just get people who are like interested or passionate about what you're doing. Like we often feel like having folks who have that lived experience like can make all the difference between like fine work and great work that actually changes things.
Basically meeting the audience where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this isn't, you know, this is something that I feel like a lot of fields have tried to think about, and some have done well and some have not. But one of my earliest memories, I think you know this, my dad is a graphic designer by training and had a marketing communications firm. And one of his clients was HBO, and he did a campaign like Cyber Soul City. And we went to Black Ski Week in Vail, right? And it was kind of this idea of like, oh God, they're out there, they're skiing. Like what? Who knew that? But you know, it's interesting to think about the intersections that we all bring and sort of how those intersections influence not only who we are in the world, but what we do and what we dare to build on behalf of others. Is that something? Because as the world gets both bigger and smaller at the same time, you know, there are going to be disconnects, misunderstandings, things that people don't get, even with the best of intentions. Like, how do you think about that? Because you're at the front lines, right? You're on the front lines of like storytelling on behalf of brands and helping them get there. Like, how do we think about handling misunderstandings? Let's just take well-intentioned ones.
Yeah, I think the misunderstandings that we encounter tend to result from um, not spending enough time building relationships. And so I remember one client that when we started working with them, and you know, I don't think they'll mind if I recount this story. They're called Village of Wisdom. They're a wonderful nonprofit, educational nonprofit based in Durham, North Carolina. Village of Wisdom primarily is providing resources and services for Black parents in the Durham region, North Carolina writ large. And they came to us and said, number one, like, we've heard you guys do really good work and we'd love to explore, you know, a rebrand with you. I was very honest with them and I said, your entire staff is exclusively Black. Your community that you are serving is mostly, if not exclusively Black. I am not Black. So tell me, what do you need from my team? And they were like, thank you so much for asking. Like it was sort of the elephant in the room, but I mean, it's not like I didn't feel trust, but you know, I think in those situations, like there's sort of like this unsaid, like maybe just like a anxiety sort of that you can sense, or maybe like a little bit of a skepticism, or just sort of like I didn't feel like I was on watch or anything, but it's important that I asked that question. And it's a question I ask every client is like, what do you need from us to like feel like you can really trust that you're in good hands? And they told us like, it would be helpful if your team was majority Black. And so I went out and assembled a majority Black team. And the first meeting that we had with them was actually like, we hadn't even landed the contract yet. They're like, we think we want to work with you. We really like your proposal, but like our staff needs to like believe that you guys are the right choice. Because to that point, up to that point, I'd only really talked to like the founder and executive director. And so he had us join like their weekly staff meeting. It was all virtual, but like, you know, we were just like dropped in the middle of a staff meeting. And it was the way they framed it for us was like, this is a vibe check. So they just had us like talk about our like why do we want to work with them, what is our vision for the work, and who are we as not just like Studio Tomo does this, but like who are we as people, and that made all the difference, that like just being willing to do that's very atypical. Like I don't think I've ever had another client say like, we need our whole staff to vet you, and so we want you to join, like sort of like fish out of water, like just plop you in the bowl of our like staff meeting and just like be prepared to like talk about anything they want you to talk about. And that was like a really important lesson. And then the first official meeting after that, we had plotted out this whole kickoff where we were going to not just like walk through like the scope of the project, but also had like a very detailed timeline for how we were going to get there, how to get from point A to point B. And then it was just, we sort of like had too much baked into this presentation. And I remember like looking at the clock and being like, oh God, we still have like half the deck to get through. And we only have like 20 minutes left in this like hour and a half long meeting that we had scheduled. And I was like, there's no way we're going to make it. And so I sort of panicked. And I was just like, I'm really conscious of time. And this is me like wanting to like respect boundaries, respect their time. Like, I'm like always like hyper conscious of that, like staying on schedule. So I said, I want to be respectful of your time. Like, we're not going to be able to get through the rest of this, but why don't we skip to, we can talk about this other stuff offline. Let's skip to this slide here. And they like stop me and they're like, these questions in all these other slides you're skipping over are important. Like, and we need to, if not today, we need to schedule a follow-up to like get through them and like actually have the time to talk about them. Like, we can't just like rush through this work. And it was such a huge lesson for me. And not every client is like that. Some clients would be like, yeah, you're right, I got a busy schedule, like let's go snap, but I think in particular with the types of clients we serve, who are often not always, but often come from marginalized and underrepresented communities, who are used to consultants or just being in spaces where like their voices are dismissed, or like they're just not given the time and space to actually like engage at a real level. And after that moment, I was like, I'm never going to make that mistake again. So we ended up staying on like an extra hour, so this hour and a half meeting turned into 2.5 hours. And thankfully everyone was like really cool and gracious about like the time. But like there was a 5-minute period there where it was like, like my heart was in my throat. And I was just like, oh my God, I fucked this up. But they were so great. And yeah, so I think about like misunderstandings as oftentimes it's just like an unwillingness to really like get to the bottom of things and to like be vulnerable with each other and to be like speak truth to things with each other, even if it's hard and icky feeling. You sort of need to sit with that often to like come out of it stronger and better and like more aligned.
I'm thinking a lot about time and being intentional. A lot of what you've talked about is also discovery, this idea of having that time to find the album cover or read the magazine, right? Like, and pull out the physical page. Early on, you and I were talking about both being on Tumblr, and I know we're both on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll come back to Tumblr, but I'm just curious, like, how has this moment of going from being very, analog to digital to all things in between, like, how has that impacted your approach, either personally, just as a human, or as a brand strategist on behalf of your clients?
I love Tumblr. I don't spend any time on there anymore. I know it's like sort of made a bit of a comeback this past year with the youths. But I was using it just as a place that I think others use Pinterest, so sort of like a place for me to post mostly art and design stuff or like inspirational quotes, stuff that I found beautiful and inspiring. So I could like always go back and revisit it. And I often do, like, even though I maybe only post like one thing a year now, where I used to post like 20, 30 things, 40 things a year. Now I do often like go back and like look at specific designers' work or other things that I posted, just to be like, oh, like this is a great reference for this project we're working on. Um, and but I think like now I primarily hang out on like Instagram, and I don't love it. It's just like this deluge of stuff. I'll occasionally like bookmark something that I like and find inspiring, but it's like very random. It's super chaotic, right? Because like those little nuggets of inspiration. I really hate notifications, so I usually turn off notifications unless it's for like my close friends and family. I do want to see when they post. But like when I'm just scrolling through the feed, it's just like this. The algorithm is like I might get an occasional like work relevant post that's like from a designer or a studio that I like follow, but it's like in between like Arsenal soccer content or like Radiohead content, and like they're like back on tour, or raccoons. Like my wife Jen is obsessed with raccoons right now, and suddenly like the phone has heard us talking about raccoons, so it's just like I've liked a couple raccoon posts, and now it's like every other post is like about raccoons. So um it's harder for me to sort of like think of technology as a place to curate as it was in the past, because there's just so much shit coming from all different angles. And like I personally don't feel like there's a great like mechanism built into these apps to like really bifurcate like and compartmentalize like all the stuff. I know you can create collections and all. I'm like too lazy for that. um I've also just been really turned off by social media this year. Like, I think, quite frankly, it's like rotting all of our brains and bringing out our worst instincts and fears. I know there's also like a lot of positives that come out of social media. I've certainly like made friends through social media. Like, that's pretty special. But I do think, generally speaking, it does take us away from the stuff that like really matters. At the same time, like I said, I do find it endlessly entertaining and like occasionally educational. So that's why I stay on there. But I don't think it's like helped me produce better work like in my career. I think what helps me produce good work is reading more, which I don't do enough, like actual books, or like magazines, like those piles of New Yorkers that are just like stacking up on the coffee table, like actually opening them for once and like trying to find an article that and reading it. So like reading, going out and seeing art, being in community with people, being out in nature, away from people, to be alone with my thoughts. Like those are the things that time and time again help unlock something for me. I think it's like when my brain is switched off or exposed to stuff that like screams metaphors at me, then that's when I'm like, like the light bulbs will go off and like I can apply those aha moments back to whatever project I'm working on. And I think like our clients seem to need social media to sort of advocate for the work that they're doing, to spread awareness, to fundraise. But I really question, it's sort of double-edged sword. I mean, it's I know it's not black and white, but like I question using platforms that are like ultimately designed to go against so much of like what our clients stand for, you know? And it's like we know that, Meta does not exactly have like kind policies towards like the trans community yet. I still am very active on Instagram and WhatsApp and not so much Facebook anymore, but our clients also like seem to need to use AI, but it's sort of the same thing. It's like this sort of I feel a bit of like resignation towards using these tools that I think are not, there's like a dark side to these tools. And so the only tech I would say that I've grown to really appreciate in like recent years are Slack. I know some people fucking hate Slack and can't take it, but like I do find it to be a place that like is better than email, a combination of like email and Google Drives. Like we can sort of consolidate like all of our communications there and like be able to like link out to like other drives and platforms quite easily, like integrate those streams. And like I certainly wouldn't be able to run in my studio without it, like because I don't have a physical office. One thing I failed to mention before is like everyone who's part of Studio Tomo is a freelancer. I have no full-time employees, but I have a network of over 50 freelancers. And at any given time, I'm managing like 15 to 20 people, 10 to 15, 15 to 20 people. And so I like need Slack as a tool to sort of be able to coordinate and manage across all of those projects. And then the last thing, I'll stop rambling, but Figma, I would say like Figma is a great tool for not just collaboration, but also design, and like the presentation, the decks that you can produce on Figma are far superior than anything you can do in like Google Slides. So it's changed my world.
Love it. I love it when tools can change your world and change, your ability to do what you do really well and let the tools do the other stuff, right? You were talking about curation, and I want to get into service, but in 1 minute. So when you grew up, did you go to the mall?
Sure, like all the time. Yeah.
Because as you were talking, I was like, when I was a teenager, right? Like there was nothing more fun like than going to the mall on the weekends with your friends and like walking around. But each store, or each department, like there was a clear, like you are now going to be looking at clothes, or you are now going to be looking at records, and like and you could
Yeah.
actually decide like where you wanted to sort of be, and then have that like, oh, I'm going to discover something I've never seen before, right? Like I'm going to leave Sam Goody with like Rick Astley, but then maybe I've got like, I don't know, Shania Twain, like I'm mixing time
Yeah.
zones, but
Yeah.
you know what
Right.
I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like I think, and I know maybe this is just a nostalgia for something that obviously is also imperfect, but this idea of curation in the digital world that feels a little more self-directed
Mm-hmm.
than the algorithm allows for, right? I think the algorithm is a little pushy. It
Yeah,
feels.
100%. I mean, I remember like in the early days of Twitter when I was managing social media at Acumen, I used to use this tool called TweetDeck, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, but you could like organize your feeds by like subject. And so I like had a feed that was all like peer organizations. I had a feed that was all like philanthropists. And I had a feed that was like all about like business innovation, and a feed that was all about like design and creativity. And so like I was able to organize these feeds, and I could sort of like dip into whichever one I needed to or wanted to, which is like very useful. And I'm sure those tools still exist, but they're not part of my like work stream anymore. And certainly don't use like, I don't know people who use TweetDeck like in their personal lives. Maybe there are people who do that, but um, yeah, I 100% agree. Like it's the ability to curate, but also like self-direct is so like, I feel like that is sorely missing.
Somebody get on that, audience. We got um, your practice, your sort of commercial practice is very focused on community, but I also know that you are engaged in the nonprofit world as a board member. So you're on the board of the Asian Mental Health Collective, and then you're also an emeritus member and former president of the Marketing Advisory Board at Virginia Tech, right? Um, you know, for folks who are thinking about joining a nonprofit board or thinking about getting engaged, like what are some tips that you have, or how did these opportunities come about for you?
Yeah, I mean, so for Virginia Tech, that's where I went to school. So I'm an alum, and a former colleague of mine. Actually, that digital agency I started up with classmates. Like one of the people that founded that agency was serving on the Virginia Tech Marketing Advisory Board, and they were looking for new board members. And they're like, "You need to call up James because he'll be able to offer a different perspective than anyone else on this board because he's working at this amazing nonprofit called Acumen." And so that's how I was brought into that group. And I was drawn to the idea of like spending a lot of time back in Blacksburg, Virginia, where the school is, mostly for nostalgia, but also like when I go there, it is like a nervous system like reset because it's very bucolic. It's like tranquil. It's beautiful. Um, it's just you like enter this town and just like feels like you can just feel like all of that stress sort of like melt away. Um, so that was like sort of selfish reasons why I joined. But I also think um, it was about giving back and wanting to give opportunities that I didn't have when I was in school. Um, it's not like Virginia Tech is in the heart of like advertising media world of New York City or any coastal city. Like, and so we didn't have like recruiters from advertising agencies coming and banging on our doors. And we certainly didn't have faculty at the time who like really felt like they were like on the cutting edge of what was happening out in industry. And so I felt like this would be a good opportunity to both mentor and like guest lecture and teach students. It's paid me back in dividends. Like I've found a couple of incredible interns through who students at Virginia Tech, and like one who is graduating next week and is going to continue to work with us after she graduates because she's absolutely total rock star. Sydney, shout out to Sydney. And I think those opportunities serving on that board have certainly like helped me be better at my job. The other board you mentioned was Asian Mental Health Collective. And so the executive director of Asian Mental Health Collective, their partner used to be someone that I worked with at Acumen. And so sort of full circle moments where and the mission really spoke to me. I don't have a lot of personal experience with seeking professional therapy, but it's something that I've it's sort of been like something I've put off for years and years and years, probably to my own detriment, where I'm like, I should probably like get a therapist. And I know that. Um, like people are like, James, you're a worry wart. I'm like, I know, I should get a therapist. But their mission really spoke to me. And especially like in the post-pandemic world and social unrest of recent years, and like particularly they sort of came into prominence after like the Atlanta spa shootings. And so when I was approached back in 2023 to join that board, it was something that felt like a calling, like a call of duty for me. And I think also like as a parent who often struggles with like how to be a good parent, and like a business owner that just feels like the daily pressures and stresses of like running my own business, like I wanted to surround myself with people who understood like the importance of like mental well-being. And so again, sort of selfish reasons, but I really felt like at the end of the day, this was an opportunity to both give back to places that nurtured me, but also like communities that have like nurtured me as an Asian American. And these roles have also like certainly informed and made me better at my job. Like so much of my job as a brand strategist is not just like figuring out a company's like brand story and positioning statement, but it's also the job of a brand strategist is to think about how do we bring an entire organization along for the journey, including not just the project team that you're working with, but oftentimes the board and other stakeholders. So having served on a couple of boards now and like seen how different boards operate and the complex dynamics that are involved there, and like some of the common pitfalls that are involved in like board governance structures and like board executive director relationships, like that has really helped me think much more strategically about like how do we make sure that as we do this work, if we're rebranding an organization, like we make sure that all the stakeholders are accounted for and we like get them bought in.
Yeah, no, that's a huge good point for folks to remember, that there's often a board behind management, and management often has to play that role of bringing the board along. So having folks like you who are sensitive to that as they're working with management, it's a very, very big skill. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, James, we've made it to the lightning round.
Oh God.
this is this is where I get some quickish hit answers from guests. So, first topic, preoccupations. So, this borrows from something that I've learned in my creative writing practice, but this idea that we often come back to things over and over and over again, and they show up in the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories we tell others, or if we're like you in the business of storytelling, the stories we might create for others to consume. Some of my preoccupations, as the audience now well knows, include organized animal crime networks,
Have you
ancestry.
seen Zootopia too?
I am not seeing Zootopia 2. Should I see Zootopia and Zootopia 2?
You should see both, but like
Okay.
this was one of the rare instances where like the sequel is even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Zootopia 2, 10 out of 10, no notes. It's like actually great for adults.
Okay.
Like I went because our son Max really wanted to go.
Right.
We were sort of like, and we went and we were like, wow, like that was actually like that was great.
I will take your
But
suggestion.
yes, organized animal crime networks,
Yes.
Zootopia 2. You'll love it.
Okay. I love that. I'm also preoccupied with ancestors and work life integration. And sometimes all of those things come together. But curious about what's one of your preoccupations?
My primary preoccupation is just like my child and like thinking about like what I'm doing wrong. to like, I'm always thinking like, did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? How am I fucking up my kid?
Yep. And
I'm sure I'm sure I'm fucking him up somehow. How am I doing it? Sorry,
how old is he right now?
Max is 9 in
He's
fourth
9. So
grade.
you're getting like probably some interesting feedback that's both signal and noise
Yeah,
all
and
the time.
also because when they're younger and they're sort of like pre-verbal or they're just learning language and can't really properly express themselves, it's harder to know like if how your parenting is like having the desired effect. And now that he's like a very verbose human with many opinions and a big personality and like already set in his ways and like I'm like, oh, now I see what worked and what didn't work. So that's like my number one preoccupation is just like constantly thinking about like how can I be a better parent. Number two is Arsenal, the soccer
Soccer
football
club.
club that I support. It occupies I shouldn't say most when I'm not thinking about Max. Even when it's Max, because Max is also a huge, um, I apologize, Max. I turned him on to Arsenal as well, and uh, it's been a tough few years being an Arsenal fan. They're perennial like second place. Like they almost reach the pinnacle, but they can't quite get over the hump. And so I often believe like Arsenal's success as a football club is dependent on like my hard work and like me leading a virtuous life. And so I'm like, oh my God, big game coming up this weekend. Like I've got to like crush it at work. I've got to be like super kind to like everyone I encounter. I got to like go extra to like put
There's
good
some
out into
karmic
the world.
connection.
Yeah,
Okay.
like put good out into the world so that like they win this weekend.
If there was more fandom like yours, James, imagine the
Just
world.
imagine. They say soccer brings the people in the world together.
I
Uh,
mean, I think the 1986 Mets brought people together. But
yeah,
that's
same
just
thing.
me.
I mean, like the other day, like they they lost. It was like literally like the last kick of the game was like in injury time was like the dying moment of the game. They lost on the last kick, and I was like, oh, I was sort of mean to Max last night when he was annoying me. It's
You
like
did it.
I shouldn't have reacted that way. It's my fault. I'm sorry, Arsenal fans. Okay.
James, I love that. Um, can't wait for your answer on this one. So, superpowers. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is because we get to share what we're really good at. So, what's one of your superpowers?
I really don't like this question.
I'm going to make you answer it anyway.
Um, I've been
Or you
told,
can
speaking of SYP like cards, so they have a
they
deck of
yes.
cards that like help you figure out your superpower.
Yes, they do.
You're like,
This is
are you
not
more this or
SY.
that? This or that? And then eventually you're down to one card, you're like, aha, that's what I'm good at. And I think every time I've done it, it like comes down to like the empathy card. And so I'd say like empathy is one of the things that I'm not going to call it a superpower. I think it is one of the things that I prioritize and like really try to practice in my everyday life, not just in work. But I think like that sense of empathy and like really like understanding what is driving someone, how they're really feeling at a particular moment, trying to put myself in their shoes, um, is allows me to like it's the thing that allows me to pull together um, like diverse groups of people in the work. It's a I talked about how like Studio Tomo forms these custom teams of people from all different backgrounds, and I think like my ability to lead with empathy and to really understand who someone is and like what makes them tick and like how to show up in a way that like unlocks them and makes them shine is what allows me to bring together these groups of people, oftentimes people who've never worked together. Like I know them and I trust them, but they've never worked together, and like to create sort of the dynamics and the environment and the conditions for like everyone to like feel safe and but also like excited and inspired to like do great work together. It's sort of like the whole value proposition of Studio Tomo, and I think that like starts at the end of the day. It like starts with empathy.
And, I think that the thing about superpowers is when we're really great and best day, they're amazing. But especially for other folks like you who are empathetic, and that's the thing that they are known for, that they're sought out for, like, what are some of the costs for you? Like when that becomes a strength overused?
It I think sometimes it can lead to a lack of decisiveness. So I think empathetic people tend to be good at seeing all sides, but also like inviting in more voices than others might typically do. When you're trying to like run an efficient project or an efficient business, like those two things are sort of like at odds with each other. And so I have to know when to, I mean, it's not like I ever like turn off the empathy switch. But I sort of need to know how to like, what are the right moments where it like really, really matters, um, when I really need to like receive input from all the people, and when it's actually like less important and people are going to be fine with that, you know? Um, and I think that's the hardest thing about it. The other thing is like, I, and I wouldn't change this for, anything in the world, but like, I feel like both the like highs of like and the joys of like people who are close to me like very acutely, and but I also like can feel their pain and all the things that like their insecurities, the thing that like brings them down, the things that prevent them from showing up in the way that they want. I feel those like just as acutely, if not more sometimes, and sometimes that's just like overwhelming to like feel like I know how everyone's feeling, and trying to and sometimes try like I I try to not put it all on my shoulders. Like I know it's not about me at the end of the day, but sometimes like as a strategist, I can't help but to think about like what can I be doing in this moment to like help someone who is struggling with depression or like just going through a hard time dealing with grief or something like that. And I tend to try to take on a lot and sort of at the cost of like maybe my own well-being, or like the well-being of like even like the people that are in the rooms next to me, like my wife and my child. And so that's the thing that I think is like probably the hardest piece, is like just remembering that like other people's battles, even though like I want them to be my battles too, because we are in this together in life. It's like not like up to me to solve, and just like give myself a bit of grace that like sometimes like just listening is like all people really need, like just being seen, just like acknowledging that people are feeling what they're feeling is often like the greatest gift you can give. And so I always try to remind myself of that, but it's hard to remember sometimes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of grace and community, this is an ask. And, I'm here too, is about that. It's about bringing people together to learn and share and be inspired. And this conversation, the little bit of time we spent together, you've already given the audience so much, and you give a lot with your time and your resources. So I want to turn it to the audience. Like, what is something that they can do for you?
I need nothing. I'm good. But um, it is my duty to like advocate for the causes that I'm close to. And so I would say um, Asian Mental Health Collective, which as you know, I am a board member of. Um, Check them out if you believe in their mission and think that what they're doing is adding value to the world, to society. Consider a contribution, or just like signing up for the newsletter to like see what they're up to. If you want something really fun, they just launched like a merch store yesterday. So some hot merch just dropped yesterday, just in time for the holidays. You can buy a tote bag that says emotional baggage on it, which is like great. They have like a emotional support water bottle. So just like really fun, cute, clever, like talk, branding. This is like my team who helped brand AMHC, like put a lot of love and like laughter into this merch. And yeah, like if you like it, then buy it as a gift for yourself or for a friend for the holidays, and that would mean a lot to me.
I love that. And that, that's something about boards, right? You get to bring the things that you're really good at and put your stamp on an organization. So I'm very excited. I saw earlier on social media the drop, so I'm going to look more closely. My final question is something that has permeated this entire conversation, but we're going to be very specific. A read, a listen, and a watch. So there, as we've talked about,
One of
there's
each.
and yes, I want to hear one of each because I know you are deeply immersed in all media.
Oh God, let me see. Okay, a read.
Yep.
If Lee ever watches this, she'll be horrified to know I haven't finished this book yet. But my friend Lee Stein,
Okay.
this book this year, it's a gothic mystery set in a contemporary hype house, sort of like a um, old Hollywood style LA mansion where like a mystery happens and there's a bunch of TikTok influencers living there.
Oh,
So like
okay.
very contemporary, quite the critique of like contemporary culture. Brilliant. So my friend Lee Stein, if you're seeing this, it's meant for you. So
We're all seeing it
a
now.
real fun novel, like highly recommend. Um, and then, and Lee, I'm like almost done, just so you know. Like it's been a busy fall, but I'm back. I'm back with it, and like I'm loving every page. Um, a listen. Hmm. I'm going to come back to that. A watch, I would say, I already told you about Zootopia 2.
You did.
For people who are like above animation,
I don't know who
would
they would be.
say, yeah, who are these people? Um, the new Knives Out movie is like brilliant.
Are we on
It's
number 3 at this point, or what are we on?
number 3. It's the best of the 3 in my opinion. It's called Wake Up Dead Man, a Knives Out mystery. So it's the third in the series. It's like an absolute romp of a murder mystery. So like two mysteries. This is a mystery. Like that movie's also a mystery, but it's also like all of Ryan Johnson's films like is like a really sharp commentary on like society and like politics today. There's an amazing cast, as like all the Knives Out movies have these like really fun ensemble casts. So there's like Daniel Craig as the private detective, Benoit Blanc, and he's like this ridiculous Southern accent, like sort of like can't quite pinpoint it, and he's like very dapper. Who Josh O'Connor's in it as a priest. Um, Josh Brolin is like unbelievable as sort of the main priest at this one church. Glenn Close is incredible in it. Jeffrey Wright's in it. Mila Kunis, Kerry Washington, Andrew Scott's in it. Kaylee Spaney. I don't know.
Everybody's in it.
Yeah, so like it's like a really fun cast, but it's just like it's also just like really well done. And it's like deeper, I feel like, than a lot of his last two movies. So I highly recommend. Listen, I it's not like new at all. But I've been like revisiting a lot of Radiohead these days. It's like not that exciting of a choice. I think it's
What
their
tracks in particular?
well, I mean, it's hard for me to pick my favorites when I think like so many of the albums are incredible. I think everyone will say like, "Okay, Computer is the greatest, album of all time," but I would say Kid A and also like In Rainbows are incredible albums from start to finish. So great listens. They're like touring right now, so that's why they're all over my algorithm. And apparently, like the kids, Gen Z's like discovered Radiohead and is like fallen in love, like which is like very funny. So apparently, like people showing up to the concerts in Europe right now are not just olds like me. They're like there's a lot of like 20 something year olds like belting out the lyrics to like Let Down, which I don't know why that's like, I mean, it is like one of their great songs, but like, I think it somehow got caught on TikTok. It was also like in the season finale of like The Bear season one. And so it's like certainly like in the zeitgeist the last couple of years, but
It's
I
like
always
how
sort of, yeah, like I always sort of return to that band when I'm in need of like inspiration. It's sort of the way they constantly like reinvent themselves is fascinating to me.
I was gonna say it's like finding the Indigo Girls in the Barbie movie. It's like you feel seen. You feel seen as a Gen
100%.
X. I love those selections. Thank you. And I also like the provocative, like, no, I'm not going to OK Computer. I'm going somewhere else. That's good. That's good. James, thank you so much for being here and being on I'm Here Too.
Thank you. This was a real pleasure and an honor to be here. So thanks for inviting me.
Of course. All right. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Well, that's all for this episode of I'm Here Too. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. Please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss the next conversation. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.